The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the soft vibrations of 1,000 different breathing patterns. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated atmospheric pods, each one maintaining the precise environmental conditions their biology demanded. At the center of the massive circular arena, Ambassador of the Collective stood on her 4 crystalline legs, her voice carrying through the universal translators with the authority of someone who had never known defeat. "Fellow council members," began, her words creating small light patterns across her translucent skin, "we gather today to discuss the applicant species for membership in our great alliance, the humans of Earth." A ripple of what could only be described as polite skepticism passed through the assembly. The delegation shifted their massive, beetle-like forms with barely concealed amusement. The ethereal floated in their energy pods, their thoughts practically visible as swirling motes of light that conveyed their doubts more clearly than words ever could. Council Leader M, a towering being whose species had evolved from apex predators on a world where gravity was 3 times that of Earth, raised one of his 6 arms. His voice boomed through the chamber like distant thunder. "These humans," he said, consulting the holographic display that materialized before him, "they come from a world with barely adequate gravity. Their atmosphere is thin, their star weak and yellow. They have no natural armor, no claws, no venom sacs, no electromagnetic pulse capabilities." "Indeed," agreed, her form shimmering with what passed for agreement among her people. "Our preliminary scans show they possess only basic technology. Chemical rockets, primitive energy weapons, and their military forces appear to rely on simple kinetic projectiles. Their bodies are soft, easily damaged, and they require constant hydration and regular feeding cycles." The draconic representative, whose species had conquered 12 star systems through sheer physical dominance, let out a sound that the translators struggled to interpret. It settled on something between a laugh and a growl. "They cannot even survive in vacuum for more than moments. Their bones break under minimal pressure. What possible use could such fragile creatures be to our alliance?" From the observation gallery reserved for potential member species, Captain Sarah of the United Earth Defense Force watched the proceedings with carefully controlled expression. She sat alongside her small diplomatic team in a simple atmospheric bubble, their basic environmental suits a stark contrast to the elaborate life support systems surrounding them. Her weathered hands, from years of combat engineering, rested calmly on the table before her. Beside her, Dr. The Expeditions whispered softly, "They're not even trying to hide their contempt." His response was equally quiet, but carried the weight of someone who had spent 20 years fighting in conflicts these aliens couldn't imagine. "Let them talk, Doc. Words are just words." The debate continued for hours. Species after species stood to voice their concerns about humanity's apparent weakness. The gas giant dwelling pointed out that humans couldn't survive in high-pressure environments. The silicon-based noted that human flesh was vulnerable to temperatures that their species considered comfortable. Even the traditionally neutral Aquarians expressed doubts about a species that required such specific conditions to survive. "Furthermore," continued, now 3 hours into her presentation, "their military history shows an alarming tendency toward self-destruction. They have engaged in countless conflicts with members of their own species, often over resources that could be easily shared or ideological differences that seem trivial to more advanced civilizations." The holographic display shifted to show images taken from human historical databases. Battles from across Earth's timeline flickered past ancient armies clashing with bronze weapons, medieval sieges, world wars with their devastating technologies, and recent conflicts in space stations and lunar colonies. "Look at this data," his voice took on a tone that the translators rendered as academic disdain. "In just their last 1,000 years, they have engaged in over 1,500 significant military conflicts. They have developed weapons specifically designed to kill other humans. Their entire species seems predisposed toward violence, yet paradoxically, they appear completely unsuited for actual combat." Council Leader M studied the data with his primary set of eyes, while his secondary set continued to observe the human delegation. "Their soldiers carry primitive firearms that require physical ammunition. They wear armor that provides minimal protection compared to standard galactic military gear. Most concerning of all, they seem to routinely place themselves in situations that would be considered suicide missions by any reasonable military doctrine." "Exactly my point," agreed. "They volunteer for assignments with casualty rates exceeding 90%. They deliberately place themselves between threats and civilian populations despite having no natural defensive capabilities. It suggests either severe mental deficiencies or a complete lack of understanding regarding actual combat situations. In the observation gallery, Master Sergeant, a man whose left arm had been replaced with a mechanical prosthetic after an encounter with space pirates near Jupiter, actually smiled. Captain noticed his expression and raised an eyebrow in question. "Ma'am," said in the lowest possible whisper, "they think we're stupid." "Copy that, Sergeant," replied with the faintest hint of amusement in her voice. The presentations continued well into the Galactic Standard Day cycle. The hive mind species of 442b expressed concerns about humanity's individualistic nature, suggesting it made them unpredictable and therefore unreliable as allies. The machine intelligences of the synthetic collective noted that human technology was embarrassingly primitive, with their fastest ships barely capable of reaching 10% of light speed. "They're space vessels," announced the synthetic representative in a voice like grinding gears, "are constructed from materials that would be considered scrap metal by our standards. Their largest warships carry fewer weapons than our standard patrol craft. Most tellingly, their crews are entirely biological, with all the inherent limitations that implies." "Biological crews," repeated with that same grinding laugh. "No radiation shielding in their genetics, no ability to function in zero atmosphere, requiring sleep cycles and emotional support systems. How could such beings possibly contribute to galactic defense?" The tide of opinion in the chamber was clearly against humanity. Even species that had initially remained neutral began expressing reservations. The plant-like noted that humans consumed other life forms for sustenance, which they found disturbing. The energy beings of the Plasma Consortium suggested that carbon-based life was inherently inferior to their more advanced energy matrix existence. As the formal debate period drew to a close, prepared for her final statement, the chamber fell silent, thousands of different respiratory systems creating a symphony of expectation. "Honored council members," she began, "while we appreciate the human species' desire to join our great alliance, we must consider the practical implications. Membership in the Galactic Council requires species to contribute meaningfully to our collective defense, our scientific advancement, and our cultural enrichment." She paused, allowing her words to sink in across the diverse assembly. The evidence clearly shows that humans lack the physical capabilities for meaningful military contribution. Their technology is centuries behind our standards. Their society is fragmented and prone to internal conflict. Most concerning of all, they appear to have a fundamental misunderstanding of what actual warfare entails. The holographic display showed footage from recent human military exercises, soldiers running through obstacle courses, conducting urban warfare training, practicing emergency medical procedures under fire. To the gathered aliens, it looked like elaborate games rather than serious military preparation. They practiced scenarios that would be resolved in moments by any properly equipped galactic military unit, explained. They train extensively for situations that could be avoided entirely through superior technology or basic tactical awareness. Their entire military doctrine appears to be based on accepting massive casualties to achieve objectives that could be accomplished without loss of life by more advanced species. Council Leader M nodded his massive head, his predator's instincts telling him these humans would be prey rather than predators in any real conflict. The data speaks for itself. Humanity appears to be a species trapped in perpetual adolescence, unable to move beyond primitive territorial conflicts and basic survival instincts. From the observation gallery, the human delegation watched this systematic dismantling of their species' capabilities with remarkable calm. Doctor occasionally took notes, treating the proceedings like a fascinating study in bias. The military personnel remained perfectly still, their expressions neutral but alert. Captain, however, was thinking about something else entirely. Her mind wandered to a battle 3 years earlier, when her unit had held a position against overwhelming odds to allow civilian evacuations from a colony under attack by unknown raiders. She thought about Corporal Williams, who had stayed behind to manually detonate charges that sealed a tunnel, saving 200 lives at the cost of his own. She remembered Lieutenant Park, who had carried wounded civilians through 12 kilometers of hostile terrain with a shattered leg, refusing medical attention until everyone else was safe. These aliens thought humans were fragile. They thought human soldiers were poorly equipped and badly trained. They thought human military doctrine was primitive and suicidal. Captain almost felt sorry for them. The voting was swift and decisive. 43 species voted against immediate membership for humanity. 3 abstained. Only one, the relatively minor Aquarian delegation, voted in favor, and even they expressed significant reservations. The motion to grant membership to the human species is, announced Council Leader M with finality. However, the Council recognizes humanity's potential for growth and development. We offer instead a provisional status, allowing for cultural and technological exchange while humanity works to address the deficiencies we have identified today. The translator struggled with the diplomatic phrasing, but the message was clear. Humans were welcome to observe and learn, but they were not considered ready for full membership in galactic society. As the session formally concluded, and the various species began departing for their ships, Ambassador approached the human observation gallery. Her crystalline form moved with graceful confidence as she activated the privacy barrier around the human seating area. "I hope you understand," she said, her voice carrying what the translator interpreted as genuine sympathy, "that our decision today was not personal. The galaxy can be a dangerous place, and we have a responsibility to ensure that any species we invite into our alliance can contribute meaningfully to our collective security." Captain stood and executed a perfect military salute before extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Ambassador, we appreciate the time and consideration the Council has given our application." Studied the extended hand for a moment before carefully touching it with one of her crystalline appendages. The human's grip was firm but not aggressive, and she could feel the warmth of biological circulation beneath the soft flesh. "Your species shows promise," continued. "Perhaps in a few centuries, after you have developed more advanced technologies and evolved beyond your current limitations, we might reconsider. The galaxy has room for all peaceful species, given time and growth." "That's very kind of you," replied, her voice carrying no trace of resentment or disappointment. "I'm curious, though. In your observations of human military capabilities, have you had the opportunity to witness any of our forces in actual combat situations?" Slight patterns shifted to what the translator indicated was mild confusion. "Combat situations? You mean your training exercises and historical conflicts?" "Yes, we have reviewed extensive footage and data." "I see," said thoughtfully. "And in your experience, how often do galactic species actually face real military threats? I imagine with such advanced technology and enlightened civilizations, actual warfare must be quite rare." "Oh, quite rare indeed," agreed, her tone becoming more animated as she moved into familiar territory. "The last significant conflict was the Nectar War nearly 2 centuries ago, when the collective attempted to claim territory belonging to the Botanical Union. It was resolved quite efficiently through superior firepower and technological advantage." "Efficiently," repeated. "How long did the conflict last?" 3 standard galactic years," replied with something resembling pride. "The collective's forces were systematically eliminated through orbital bombardment and automated defense systems. Very few casualties on the Union side, since most of the fighting was conducted remotely." Doctor, who had been listening to this exchange with growing fascination, leaned forward. "Ambassador, when you say very few casualties, what sort of numbers are we talking about?" "Less than 50,000 total across 3 years of conflict," answered. "It was considered one of the most economical military victories in recent galactic history." The human delegation exchanged glances that were subtle but meaningful to anyone who knew how to read military personnel. Sergeant's prosthetic hand flexed unconsciously, a nervous habit he had developed since losing his original arm in a single engagement that had lasted less than 6 hours and cost twice that many lives. "That does sound very economical," agreed. "Tell me, Ambassador, in your species' history, have you ever faced a situation where retreat was not an option, where you had to hold a position regardless of casualties because civilian lives depended on it?" Slight patterns shifted to what might have been confusion or slight discomfort. "Such situations are generally avoided through proper planning and technological superiority. The goal of modern warfare is to achieve objectives with minimal resource expenditure, including personnel." "Of course," nodded. That makes perfect sense from a resource management perspective. The conversation continued for several more minutes, touching on various aspects of galactic military doctrine and human military history. Found herself oddly fascinated by the human approach to conflict, even as she remained convinced of its primitive nature. Your species' willingness to accept casualties for abstract concepts like honor and duty is particularly intriguing from an anthropological perspective, she noted, though obviously impractical from a strategic standpoint. Obviously, agreed with a straight face. As the human delegation prepared to return to their ship, felt compelled to offer one final piece of advice. Captain, I hope your species will use this time to reflect on the feedback you have received today. The galaxy truly could benefit from human perspectives once you have evolved beyond your current limitations. We'll certainly give it serious consideration, replied. Thank you again for your time and insights, Ambassador. As they walked toward the docking bay where their modest transport waited, Doctor couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. Captain, what do you think they'll do when they find out what humans are actually capable of in real combat? Was quiet for a long moment, thinking about classified reports she had read, about battles fought in the outer systems where the only witnesses were the stars themselves, about human soldiers who had faced impossible odds and somehow found ways to win. Doc, she said finally, I don't think they're going to find out from us telling them. The human transport ship departed the council station without fanfare, just another small vessel among the hundreds that came and went each day. As it pulled away from the massive structure, its modest engines barely registering on the station's sensors, none of the alien observers paid it much attention. They had more important things to worry about than a species too fragile and primitive to contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization. The humans would learn, eventually, or they would remain isolated in their little corner of the galaxy, playing their elaborate war games and pretending their crude weapons could make a difference in real conflicts. It would be another 6 months before the galaxy learned how catastrophically wrong that assumption was. But that was still in the future. For now, the Galactic Council continued its business, confident in its understanding of warfare, technology, and the proper order of civilized species. The humans had been evaluated and found wanting, just as hundreds of other primitive species had been before them. The universe, they believed, would continue operating according to the rules they understood. They had no idea those rules were about to change forever. The first indication that something had gone catastrophically wrong came through the emergency beacon network that connected all major galactic civilizations. The signal originated from the system, home to the proud Draconic Empire's primary military academy and the largest weapons manufacturing facility in 3 sectors. Admiral of the Galactic Defense Coalition received the transmission while reviewing quarterly reports aboard the flagship Eternal Dominance. The massive vessel, constructed from materials that could withstand the gravitational field of a neutron star, represented the pinnacle of galactic military engineering. Its crew of 12,000 beings from 40 different species operated weapon systems that could shatter moons and shield technology that could deflect the energy output of entire stars. Admiral, announced Lieutenant Commander, her serpentine form coiled around the communications console, we're receiving an emergency transmission from Draconic Command. The signal is unusual. His 4 primary eyes focused on the display, while his secondary visual organs continued monitoring the bridge. As a member of the apex predator species from Rigel VII, he had evolved to process multiple streams of information simultaneously, making him ideally suited for military command. Define unusual, Commander. The signal is fragmenting, sir. It's as if the transmission is being cut off repeatedly, then restarting. But the pattern doesn't match any known technical malfunction or standard enemy jamming protocols. The main display flickered to life, showing the distinctive reptilian features of General, Supreme Commander of the Draconic Forces, and one of the most feared military leaders in the galaxy. His scales, normally a proud golden bronze, appeared dull and ash-gray. Most disturbingly, his battle crown was missing several of its ceremonial spikes, and what looked like scorch marks were visible across the left side of his massive skull. Coalition Command, his voice carried static and interference, but his words were unmistakable. This is General of the Draconic Empire. We are requesting immediate military assistance. Multiple star systems under attack by unknown forces. Our defensive lines have been. The transmission cut out for 17 seconds. When it resumed, the background showed what appeared to be explosions and the distinctive whine of energy weapons being fired at high intensity. Repeat, Coalition Command. This is an emergency request for immediate military intervention. The attackers are. They are not using standard galactic warfare protocols. Our losses are unprecedented. Admiral felt something he hadn't experienced since his species' evolutionary ancestors had faced the great predators of their genuine concern approaching actual fear. The Draconic Empire possessed the most powerful military force in 3 galactic arms. Their battle fleets could devastate entire worlds. Their soldiers were genetically enhanced killing machines, standing 3 meters tall and capable of ripping through standard body armor with their bare claws. Commander, patch me through to the Council emergency session. All senior military leaders, immediate priority. Sir, the transmission is coming back. On the screen, General reappeared, but this time he was clearly in motion, his massive form moving through what appeared to be a command center under attack. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows, and the sound of warfare was constant in the background. Coalition Command, be advised. The attacking force appears to be primarily composed of soldiers from the recently rejected applicant species. Humans. I repeat, humans are conducting coordinated military operations across multiple systems. The words hit Admiral like a physical blow. Humans, the fragile primitive species that had been Council membership just 6 months ago. The beings with soft flesh and crude chemical weapons who required atmospheric suits to survive in vacuum. Sir, continued, his voice strained in a way that no member of the draconic species had ever been heard to speak. These are not the same humans we evaluated. They are not fighting like any known galactic military doctrine. They are not behaving rationally. The transmission became clearer for a moment, and the full scope of the chaos behind the general became visible. Draconic soldiers, each one a towering mass of muscle, scales, and natural weapons, were moving through the corridors with what could only be described as panic. Their formation discipline, legendary throughout the galaxy, had completely broken down. They don't retreat when facing overwhelming odds, said, his voice carrying a note that the universal translators struggled to interpret before settling on something between bewilderment and horror. We flanked a human position with a force 10 times their size. Standard doctrine would be to withdraw and regroup. Instead, they charged directly at us, with weapons that should not be effective against our armor. Admiral activated the Emergency Council communication system, sending priority alerts to every major military leader in the galaxy. The responses came back within minutes, each one carrying the same theme: impossible attacks by human forces against supposedly superior galactic military positions. The Crystalline Collective reported that human soldiers had somehow infiltrated their underground fortress cities, moving through crystal mazes that should have been impossible for biological beings to navigate. The mechanical syndicates found their automated defense systems being systematically defeated by humans using primitive electronic warfare techniques that shouldn't have worked against their advanced AI networks. Admiral, Commander's voice carried a tremor that made predator instincts activate fully. We're receiving reports from the Aaron home system. Ambassador's personal flagship has gone dark. The last transmission was unusual. The secondary display activated, showing the crystalline architecture of a command ship. Ambassador appeared on screen, her usually composed light patterns chaotic and rapid. Behind her, the ordered perfection of her species' technology showed clear signs of battle damage. This is Ambassador to any coalition forces. Her voice carried harmonics that the translators interpreted as extreme stress. My flagship is under assault by human forces. I do not understand how this is possible. They have somehow boarded my vessel using primitive cutting tools and chemical explosives. The camera angle shifted, showing the corridor behind her. What Admiral saw everything he understood about space combat. Human soldiers in basic environmental suits were moving through the crystalline hallways, their simple kinetic weapons somehow effective against technology that could reshape matter at the molecular level. They are not using standard boarding protocols, continued, her form flickering with what appeared to be incomprehension. They breached our hull in 17 different locations simultaneously. When our automated defenses activated, they They used the damaged sections as cover, turning our own defensive systems against us. One of the humans came into view, and Admiral found himself staring at something that challenged his understanding of military capability. The figure was clearly female, average height for her species, wearing what appeared to be basic military gear that wouldn't have impressed a civilian security force. Her weapon was a simple projectile rifle that fired chemically propelled metal fragments. But the way she moved through the crystalline environment was like nothing in any galactic military manual. She flowed around cover with an efficiency that spoke of extensive combat experience, used the alien architecture to her advantage in ways that suggested an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional warfare. And most unsettling of all, she advanced constantly toward the enemy position despite being outnumbered and... Admiral's voice was becoming increasingly distressed. These humans are not fighting to win. They are fighting to make us lose. There is a difference, and I do not understand what it means. Before Admiral could request clarification, the transmission cut to static. Reports continued flooding in from across the galaxy. The peaceful agricultural worlds found their orbital defense platforms being systematically dismantled by human forces using improvised weapons and tactics that no military academy in the galaxy taught. The proud warrior caste of the Rigel systems discovered that their traditional honor combat was useless against humans who fought without regard for any rules of engagement. "Sir," Commander announced, "we're receiving a direct transmission. It's from the humans." The main display shifted to show the interior of what was clearly a human military vessel. The technology was as primitive as the initial assessments had indicated: exposed wiring, manual control systems, and atmospheric processors that looked like they had been built in a factory, rather than grown or programmed like proper galactic equipment. In the center of the screen stood a human female wearing what appeared to be a standard military uniform. Her rank insignia indicated she was a captain, roughly equivalent to a mid-level commander in galactic forces. Behind her stood several other humans, their expressions calm but alert. Admiral recognized her immediately. Captain Sarah, the leader of the human delegation that had observed the council proceedings 6 months ago. The same woman who had sat quietly while species after species explained why her people were too primitive and fragile to contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization. "Admiral," Captain said, her voice carrying no trace of anger or aggression, despite the fact that her species was apparently conducting military operations against the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. "I am Captain Sarah of the United Earth Defense Force. I believe we need to talk." Every predatory instinct Admiral possessed told him he was looking at a dangerous adversary, but his rational mind couldn't reconcile that feeling with the evidence before him. This was a human, member of a species that couldn't survive in vacuum without artificial life support, using technology that was centuries behind galactic standards. "Captain," he said carefully, "our forces are reporting attacks by human military units across multiple star systems. Can you explain what is happening?" His expression remained perfectly professional. "Admiral, 6 months ago, your council evaluated humanity's application for membership in the galactic community. The decision was made that we were too primitive, too fragile, and too inexperienced in real warfare to contribute meaningfully to galactic defense." "That is correct," confirmed, though he was beginning to suspect where this conversation was heading. "The council was particularly concerned about our military capabilities," continued. "Multiple species expressed doubt that human forces could function effectively in actual combat situations. There were questions about whether our soldiers understood what real warfare entailed." Admiral felt a sinking sensation that was deeply familiar to any predator who suddenly realized they might have who was the hunter and who was the prey. "Captain," he said slowly, "are you saying that these attacks are some form of demonstration?" "Not attacks, Admiral," corrected, her tone remaining conversational. "Training exercises. The Council expressed concern that humanity had never faced real military opposition. We decided that concern needed to be addressed." The implications hit Admiral like a collapsing star. "Training exercises." "Yes, sir. For the past 6 months, human military units have been conducting live-fire exercises against various galactic military forces. We wanted to ensure that our soldiers gained experience with the kind of advanced technology and superior capabilities that they would face in actual galactic conflicts." Commander Serpentine form had gone completely rigid. "Sir, are you saying that your forces are using our military assets as training targets?" Captain glanced at someone off-screen before responding. "That's essentially correct, Commander, though I should clarify that we've been very careful to minimize actual casualties. Most of your forces are experiencing what we call mission kills. Their equipment is being disabled rather than destroyed, and personnel are being captured rather than eliminated." Admiral's mind struggled to process this information. The most powerful military forces in the galaxy were being systematically defeated by humans who were treating it as a learning experience. "Captain," he said, his voice carrying the full authority of his position, "you will order your forces to cease these attacks immediately." His expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture that any experienced military officer would recognize. It was the subtle adjustment of someone who was about to deliver information that would change everything. "Admiral, with respect, I don't believe you're in a position to give orders to human forces, but I am prepared to discuss terms for ending these exercises." "Terms," the word came out as barely controlled anger. "Yes, sir. 6 months ago, the Council determined that humanity wasn't ready for membership in the galactic community. We'd like to resubmit our application." The audacity of it was staggering. Here was a representative of a supposedly primitive species, whose forces were apparently holding hostage the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, calmly discussing membership applications as if this were a normal diplomatic negotiation. "Captain," Admiral said, drawing on every discipline technique his species had developed over of evolution, "what guarantee do you have that the Council will reconsider its decision?" Smiled for the first time since the conversation began. It was not a pleasant expression. "Admiral, let me share some recent data with you. Over the past 6 months, human forces have engaged 43 different galactic military organizations. Our win-loss ratio in these engagements is currently sitting at 100%. 0 defeats, 0 strategic withdrawals, 0 failed objectives." She paused to let that information sink in. "More importantly, we've accomplished this with casualty rates averaging less than 2% per engagement. When galactic forces retreat or surrender, we ensure their safe return to friendly territory. When they choose to fight to the finish, we accommodate that choice, but we protect our own personnel with remarkable efficiency." Admiral felt something that he was absolutely certain no member of his species had experienced in recorded history: the recognition that they were facing a superior predator. "Furthermore," continued, "human forces have captured examples of advanced galactic technology from 43 different civilizations. Our engineering teams have been reverse engineering these systems for 6 months. I think you'll find that the technology gap the Council was concerned about has been significantly reduced." The transmission shifted to show technical readouts that made Commander's jaw drop open in shock. Human engineers had not only figured out how galactic technology worked, they had improved it. Energy efficiency ratings that exceeded original specifications. Weapon systems that combined human engineering with galactic materials science to create devices that were both more powerful and more reliable than their original designs. "But Captain," Admiral said, grasping for some semblance of control over the situation, "your species was evaluated thoroughly. You lack the physical capabilities for advanced warfare. Your technology was primitive. Your military doctrine was considered outdated and ineffective." Captain nodded thoughtfully. "That's true, Admiral. The Council's evaluation was very thorough and quite accurate based on the information available at the time." "Then how?" The question came out as more of a demand than Admiral had intended. "Admiral, there's something about human military history that I don't think the Council fully understood. The conflicts you reviewed, the battles that seemed so primitive and wasteful, they weren't examples of our limitations." This expression became something that the universal translators struggled to interpret, settling on a combination of pride, sadness, and something that might have been affection. They were examples of what we're capable of when we're fighting each other, when we're holding back, when we're showing restraint. The silence that followed was profound. Every being on the bridge of the eternal dominance found themselves contemplating the implications of that statement. "You see, Admiral," continued, "when the Council evaluated our military capabilities, they were looking at humans fighting humans. They saw casualty rates and thought we were inefficient. They saw our willingness to accept losses and thought we were primitive. They saw our tactical doctrines and thought we were outdated. She leaned forward slightly, and her voice took on a tone that carried the weight of history. What they didn't understand is that every human military doctrine, every tactical system, every strategic principle we've developed over thousands of years was designed around one central assumption: that we would be fighting someone exactly as tough, as smart, as determined, and as resourceful as we are. Admiral felt the universe shift around him as the full implications became clear. When we fight each other, said quietly, we have to account for enemies who think like us, who are as willing to sacrifice as we are, who are as capable of finding ways to win against impossible odds as we are. So we developed military systems that could function under those conditions. The display shifted to show tactical analyses from recent human operations, movement patterns that anticipated enemy responses 3 moves in advance, logistical systems that could maintain operations despite constant setbacks, command structures that could function even when primary leadership was eliminated. The galaxy has been peaceful for centuries, Admiral. Your species have developed military systems designed for quick, clean victories against obviously inferior opponents. You've optimized for efficiency and minimal losses because that's the kind of warfare you've experienced. Smile returned, but this time it carried something that might have been sympathy. Humans have been optimizing for something entirely different. We've been optimizing for victory against opponents who are just as good as we are. The bridge of the eternal dominance had become completely silent. Even the background hum of the ship systems seemed muted as the crew absorbed what they were hearing. So when human forces encountered galactic military units, continued, we weren't facing opponents who were tougher than us, smarter than us, or more determined than us. We were facing opponents who had never learned to fight someone who wouldn't give up, who wouldn't retreat when the odds turned against them, who would find ways to win even when winning should have been impossible. Admiral realized that his hands were shaking, a physiological response he hadn't experienced since childhood. Captain, he said slowly, what do you want? Membership in the galactic community, replied immediately. Full membership with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. We want to contribute to galactic defense, participate in scientific exchange, and add human perspectives to the Council's deliberations. And if the Council refuses? Captain was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had made difficult decisions under impossible circumstances. Admiral, human forces are currently in control of strategic positions across 43 different star systems. We have captured or disabled significant portions of the galactic defense fleet. Our engineers have reverse-engineered enough galactic technology to ensure technological parity for the foreseeable future. She paused, and her expression became completely professional. If the Council refuses our application, we will withdraw to Earth's solar system and make it clear that we consider ourselves an independent power not subject to galactic authority. We will defend our territory against any attempt at intervention, and we will respond to any act of aggression with immediate and disproportionate force. Admiral understood exactly what she was saying. If the galaxy didn't accept humans as allies, they would face them as enemies. And given what human forces had accomplished in just 6 months of what they considered training exercises, the prospect of actual warfare against humanity was unthinkable. Captain, he said finally, I will convene an emergency session of the Council. Thank you, Admiral. Human forces will maintain current positions pending the Council's decision. We look forward to hearing from you. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the eternal dominance in absolute silence. It was Commander who finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Sir, what have we done? Admiral stared at the blank screen where Captain's calm, professional face had been just moments before. In his mind, he was recalculating everything the galactic community thought it knew about warfare, about strength, and about what it meant to be a civilization capable of defending itself. Commander, he said finally, I believe we have just learned the difference between playing at war and actually being ready to fight one. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 47 hours after Admiral's conversation with Captain. The Great Chamber, usually a testament to orderly galactic civilization, buzzed with an energy that bordered on panic. Representatives who had dismissed humanity as primitive and fragile now spoke in hushed tones about strategic implications and defensive capabilities. Council Leader M stood at the center of the assembly, his massive frame somehow diminished by the weight of recent revelations. Around him, the greatest minds in galactic civilization struggled to comprehend how their fundamental assumptions about warfare had been so catastrophically wrong. "Fellow council members," M began, his voice carrying none of its usual commanding presence, "we face an unprecedented situation. The species we rejected for membership 6 months ago has demonstrated military capabilities that exceed our collective understanding. Ambassador, recently rescued from her captured flagship by human forces who had apologized for the inconvenience and provided detailed damage reports for insurance purposes, activated her speaking crystal. Her normally radiant form flickered with patterns that spoke of deep confusion. Council Leader, I have reviewed the tactical analyses from my ship's encounter with human forces. What I witnessed challenges everything we understand about combat effectiveness and strategic thinking." The holographic display materialized above the chamber's center, showing footage from ship during the boarding action. Council members watched in silence as human soldiers moved through crystalline corridors with an efficiency that seemed impossible given their primitive equipment. "Observe their movement patterns," continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something that logic. "They do not advance in standard formation. Instead, each soldier moves independently while maintaining perfect coordination with their team. When our automated defenses targeted their apparent leader, the entire unit seamlessly adapted, with different members assuming command roles without hesitation or communication delay." General, his battle crown now missing several more ceremonial spikes from his recent encounters, rumbled his agreement. "This tactical flexibility appears to be a fundamental characteristic of human military doctrine. In 17 separate engagements, my forces attempted to disrupt their command structure by eliminating apparent leaders. In every case, human forces continued operating without degradation in effectiveness." The synthetic representative of the machine collective projected its analysis through the chamber's speakers. "Human command structures appear to function on principles of distributed authority rather than hierarchical control. Every individual soldier operates as both follower and potential leader, creating redundancy levels that our predictive algorithms classify as theoretically impossible." Admiral, participating via quantum link from his flagship, added his own observations. "More disturbing than their tactical flexibility is their approach to resource management. Human forces consistently achieve objectives despite being numerically inferior and technologically disadvantaged. They appear to view obstacles not as problems to be solved, but as opportunities to be exploited." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. For galactic warfare had followed predictable patterns. Superior technology prevailed over inferior technology, larger forces defeated smaller forces, and logical tactical decisions led to logical tactical outcomes. Humans seem to operate according to entirely different rules. "There is another consideration," announced the Nebula Collective representative, their gaseous forms swirling with agitation. "Human forces have demonstrated remarkable restraint despite their overwhelming tactical success. Casualty reports from all engagement zones indicate that human soldiers consistently chose non-lethal solutions when lethal force would have been more efficient." This observation created a ripple of discussion throughout the chamber. Species that had been defeated by human forces began sharing similar experiences. The proud warriors admitted that human soldiers had somehow disabled their silicon-based physiology without causing permanent damage, using techniques that suggested an intimate understanding of alien biology despite having no previous contact. "They studied us," realized suddenly, her crystalline form brightening with understanding. "During the 6 months since our evaluation, they studied every species represented in this council. They learned our weaknesses, our strengths, our tactical preferences, our technological capabilities." "Impossible," protested the hive mind representative. "Such comprehensive intelligence gathering would require infiltration of our most secure facilities, access to classified military databases, and observation of restricted training exercises." Admiral's voice cut through the objections. "Human forces provided detailed after-action reports following each engagement. These reports included tactical assessments that demonstrated complete knowledge of our defensive capabilities, command structures, and standard operating procedures. They knew exactly what we would do before we did it. The display shifted to show excerpts from human after-action reports, documents that read more like academic studies than military analyses. Each report contained detailed observations about galactic military psychology, predictions about likely tactical responses, and recommendations for improving galactic defensive capabilities. "They were trying to help us," whispered Doctor of the Scientific Consortium, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the horrifying realization. "These were not conquest operations, they were educational exercises." Council Leader M felt something that his apex predator ancestors would have recognized immediately. The humbling experience of realizing that what he had thought was prey was actually a more sophisticated predator than himself. "The question before this council," he said heavily, "is no longer whether humanity deserves membership in our civilization. The question is whether our civilization can afford to exist without them." Before any representative could respond, the chamber's communication system activated, announcing an incoming priority transmission. The display materialized to show Captain, but this time she was not alone. Behind her stood representatives from every branch of human military service, their insignia indicating ranks and specializations that span the entire spectrum of modern warfare. "Council members," Captain began, her voice carrying the same professional courtesy she had displayed during the original evaluation. "I understand you are currently discussing humanity's membership application." "Captain," Council Leader M replied, struggling to maintain diplomatic protocol while addressing someone whose species had just revolutionized his understanding of military capability. "The Council is indeed reviewing your application in light of recent developments." "I appreciate that, Council Leader. However, I'm calling to inform you that circumstances have changed somewhat since Admiral and I spoke 2 days ago." A chill seemed to pass through the chamber. If human military capabilities were even greater than they had demonstrated, the implications were terrifying. "What circumstances, Captain?" asked, her light patterns betraying anxiety that her diplomatic training couldn't entirely suppress. 3 hours ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected a massive fleet movement along the galactic rim. Long-range reconnaissance has identified the signatures as belonging to the Void Hunters. The name hit the council chamber like a physical blow. The Void Hunters were the galaxy's nightmare scenario, a nomadic species that consumed entire civilizations, leaving nothing but empty space in their wake. They had been dormant for over 1,000 years, leading many to hope they had simply moved beyond the galactic boundary into dark space. "Captain," Admiral's voice carried urgency that bordered on panic. "Can you confirm this identification? Void Hunter fleets have distinctive signatures that are impossible to mistake, but we need to be absolutely certain." Captain's expression remained calm, but something in her posture shifted slightly. "Admiral, human forces have been tracking this fleet for approximately 6 weeks. We can confirm that it consists of over 12,000 Void Hunter vessels, including at least 40 Planet Killer-class ships." The silence that followed was profound. 12,000 ships represented a force that could overwhelm the combined defensive capabilities of every galactic civilization simultaneously. "Furthermore," continued, "their current trajectory indicates they will reach the outer colonies of the Draconic Empire in approximately 18 standard days." General's massive form seemed to shrink as the implications became clear. The Draconic Empire, despite its military might, could not possibly withstand such an assault. No single civilization could. "Captain," M said slowly, "what are humanity's intentions regarding this threat?" Glanced at the officers behind her before responding. "Council Leader, that depends entirely on the outcome of today's session." The implication was clear but unstated. Humanity's response to the Void Hunter threat would be determined by whether they were defending allies or simply protecting their own interests. "However," continued, "I can share some preliminary intelligence that might be relevant to your deliberations." The display shifted to show tactical analyses of the approaching Void Hunter fleet. The data was incredibly detailed, showing not just ship positions and projected capabilities, but also behavioral patterns, command structures, and operational preferences. Human intelligence services have been studying Void Hunter tactics for the past 6 weeks. We've identified several strategic vulnerabilities in their fleet organization and tactical doctrines. Admiral leaned forward. Vulnerabilities? Captain, Void Hunter fleets have been considered unbeatable for over a millennium. What makes you think they can be defeated? His expression took on something that might have been a slight smile. Admiral, Void Hunter forces are optimized for overwhelming technologically inferior civilizations through superior firepower and numerical advantage. They've never faced opponents who specialize in winning against superior enemies. The implications hit the Council like a revelation. Humanity had spent thousands of years developing military doctrines designed to defeat opponents who were stronger, better equipped, and more numerous than themselves. The Void Hunters had spent thousands of years defeating opponents who relied on technological superiority to win their battles. "You're saying," said slowly, "that the Void Hunters represent the kind of enemy that human military doctrine was designed to defeat." "That's essentially correct, Ambassador. Void Hunter tactics rely on predictable responses to overwhelming force. They expect enemies to retreat when faced with superior numbers, to surrender when their technology proves insufficient, and to collapse when their command structures are disrupted." Paused, and her smile became more pronounced. "Human forces are trained to do exactly the opposite. We advance when faced with superior numbers, we adapt when our technology proves insufficient, and we continue operating when our command structures are disrupted. From a strategic perspective, we are specifically prepared to fight an enemy exactly like the Void Hunters." The council chamber erupted in discussion as representatives began to understand what Captain was suggesting. The greatest threat in galactic history might actually be vulnerable to the same species they had dismissed as too primitive for membership. "Captain," Council Leader M said, raising his voice to restore order, "are you suggesting that human forces could defeat a Void Hunter invasion?" "I'm suggesting that human forces could contribute meaningfully to the defense of galactic civilization against the Void Hunters, but only as part of a coordinated effort involving all member species of the galactic community." The condition was clear. Humanity would help defend the galaxy, but only if they were accepted as full members rather than treated as subordinate allies. Admiral activated his communication link. "Captain, what would human participation in galactic defense look like?" Gestured to the officers behind her. "Admiral, we would contribute our tactical expertise in asymmetric warfare, our experience in fighting superior enemies, and our ability to continue operations under conditions that would be considered impossible by standard galactic military doctrine." She paused before adding, "We would also contribute approximately 2 million active military personnel who have been training for exactly this type of conflict for their entire careers." 2 million soldiers. The number seemed small compared to the vast populations of galactic civilization, but given what human forces had accomplished in their recent exercises, those 2 million represented military capability that exceeded anything the galaxy had ever seen. "Furthermore," continued, "human forces have already begun preparing defensive positions in 17 strategic star systems along the projected Void Hunter approach routes. We've been collaborating with local military commanders to establish overlapping fields of fire and coordinated retreat positions." "Collaborating?" General's voice carried surprise. "When did this collaboration begin?" "Immediately after we detected the Void Hunter fleet, General. Human military doctrine emphasizes that preparation time is more valuable than any weapons system. We've been working with your forces for 6 weeks to prepare for this threat." The revelation that humanity had been secretly coordinating with galactic military forces for 6 weeks, while simultaneously conducting training exercises against those same forces, demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that awed the council representatives. "Captain," said, her voice carrying genuine curiosity, "why didn't you inform the council about the Void Hunter threat immediately?" His expression became completely serious. "Ambassador, 6 weeks ago, this council determined that humanity was too primitive and inexperienced to contribute meaningfully to galactic defense. If we had appeared before you claiming that a legendary threat was approaching and offering our assistance, what would your response have been?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every representative knew exactly what their response would have been. They would have dismissed human concerns as irrelevant and human offers of assistance as presumptuous. Instead, continued, we chose to demonstrate our military capabilities through direct action. Now, when we tell you that the Void Hunters are coming and offer our assistance, you have a basis for evaluating whether that assistance might be valuable. Council Leader M realized that he was witnessing strategic thinking that operated on timescales and levels of complexity that exceeded anything in his experience. Humanity had spent 6 months preparing for this moment, engineering a situation where the galaxy would have no choice but to take them seriously. The vote, he announced to the chamber, will be conducted immediately, all in favor of granting full membership to humanity. The response was unanimous. 47 species that had rejected humanity 6 months ago now voted without hesitation to welcome them into the galactic community. Captain, M said formally, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I am pleased to welcome humanity as the 48th member species of our civilization. Executed a perfect military salute. Thank you, Council Leader. It's an honor to serve alongside the finest military forces in the galaxy. Captain, Admiral interjected, what are humanity's recommendations for coordinating our defense against the Void Hunters? His demeanor shifted, becoming the focused intensity of a career military officer addressing a critical tactical situation. Admiral, human forces have been developing a comprehensive defensive strategy based on our analysis of Void Hunter capabilities. We recommend a multi-layered approach that takes advantage of each species' unique strengths while compensating for traditional galactic weaknesses in asymmetric warfare. The display shifted to show a complex tactical overview that spanned multiple star systems. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Rather than meeting the Void Hunters in direct battle, the combined galactic forces would draw them into a series of engagements designed to exploit their tactical assumptions. The Void Hunters expect their enemies to defend static positions with superior technology. Instead, we will use mobile forces to attack their supply lines while retreating forces draw them into prepared killing grounds. We will abandon systems that cannot be held while ensuring that every system they take costs them more than it's worth. A fighting retreat, Admiral realized. You're planning to trade space for time while bleeding them dry. Exactly, Admiral. Void Hunter psychology is built around quick victories and overwhelming force. Extended campaigns with uncertain outcomes will degrade their morale and tactical cohesion. Human forces will provide expertise in the type of warfare that extends campaigns and creates uncertain outcomes. Generals studied the tactical displays with professional interest. Captain, this strategy requires precise coordination between multiple species with different capabilities and tactical doctrines. How do you propose to achieve such coordination? Smile returned, and this time it carried genuine warmth. General, that's the easy part. For the past 6 months, human forces have been training with military units from every member species. We understand your capabilities, your preferences, and your limitations. More importantly, your forces now understand ours. The realization hit the chamber like another revelation. The training exercises hadn't just been demonstrations of human military capability. They had been comprehensive preparation for exactly this type of coordinated defense. You've been preparing us, whispered Doctor. The entire galaxy, you've been training our forces for this battle. Doctor, 6 weeks ago we detected an existential threat to galactic civilization. Our choice was simple. We could prepare for that threat alone, or we could prepare for it together. We chose to prepare together. Council Leader M found himself experiencing something he had never felt before. Genuine respect for a species he had initially dismissed as primitive. Captain, the Council places full confidence in human military leadership for the coordination of galactic defense. Thank you, Council Leader. We won't let you down. As the transmission ended, and the Council began the massive task of mobilizing 47 different civilizations for coordinated military action, one thought echoed through the chamber. 6 months ago, they had believed humans were too fragile and primitive to contribute to galactic defense. Now, the entire galaxy was depending on those same humans to save civilization itself. The irony was not lost on anyone. But as reports began coming in from across the galaxy, as human military advisors began coordinating with local commanders, And as the largest defensive operation in galactic history began to take shape, one thing became abundantly clear. The galaxy had been right about one thing. Humans were different from every other species in galactic civilization. They just hadn't understood what that difference really meant. Until now, in the depths of space, the Void Hunter fleet continued its inexorable advance toward the galaxy's outer rim. 12,000 ships carrying death and destruction, confident in their overwhelming superiority, expecting the same easy victories they had achieved for. They had no idea that this time, they would be fighting an enemy that had spent thousands of years learning how to win against impossible odds. They had no idea that they were about to discover why humans called it the human in humanity. And deep in the command centers of 100 different worlds, human soldiers smiled the same quiet smile that Captain had worn during her conversation with the Council. It was the smile of predators who had finally found prey worthy of their skills. The Void Hunters were coming, but so were the humans, and the galaxy was about to learn which was more dangerous.